As long as I lived in the village, the city never crossed my mind. My days were filled with farming and tending to livestock, and we thanked God and prayed. Life was simple but sufficient. My father owned farmland and a few cattle, enough to provide for us. That changed when I was called for military service. I left the village behind and entered a world unlike any I had known. It was 13 years ago when I joined the army, where I made many friends. Among them was a man named Murray, someone unlike anyone I had ever met. He was older than me, not because of age, but because he had spent years in prison. Despite his past, we grew close. Talking to him never felt like being inside the barracks. It was like stepping into another world. One day, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked him why he had been imprisoned. That was when I learned the truth. Murray had been in the business of digging for treasure. He had been arrested multiple times, sometimes released due to lack of evidence, but eventually he was sentenced to 2 or 3 years in prison. He couldn't recall the exact duration, and neither could I. Hearing his stories fascinated me. It wasn't just the thrill of adventure that captivated me. Murray also had knowledge, real knowledge, about treasure hunting, where to search, and how to find hidden riches. He taught me everything he knew, and I listened with all my heart. One day, I asked Murray where he had learned the tricks of treasure hunting. He told me that he had once found his way through an old book, a book that had been passed between friends. But the first time I got it, the authorities raided my place, he said. They took all my things, and I have no idea what happened to the book after that. But now it's easier. You can find complete information on a couple of websites. He must have noticed the hesitation in my face because he added, "Rahman, my brother, what I'm telling you may sound simple, but this is dangerous. The treasures we seek aren't always unguarded. Some are protected by supernatural forces. You can't just walk up and take them." But his warning didn't shake my resolve. Military service had opened my eyes to city life, and I had seen firsthand how different it was from the life I had known. I didn't want to go back to my old way of living. I wanted more. When my service ended, I returned home, but I was no longer the same person. Life around me had changed as well. I knew I needed a new path, but I also had to be careful. If I suddenly declared that I was going to hunt for treasure, no one would take me seriously. I decided to bring up the idea cautiously, starting with my father. He was a practical man, always interested in unusual things, but never one to act recklessly. To my surprise, when I told him, he didn't object. "Well," he said, nodding thoughtfully, "I like this. But tell me, where will you even begin? You don't know the way and you have no experience. How are you going to find these treasures?" It turned out my father wasn't against the idea. He simply wanted to understand how I planned to do it. What he didn't know, and what I chose not to mention, was the part about the supernatural. I knew that magical talismans would only cause unnecessary fear and disapproval. Instead, they believed I had thought things through, that I would find the right methods and make the right decisions. I was relieved. I wouldn't have to waste my energy keeping my plans a secret. After spending a few days resting, eating well, and preparing myself, I finally set out for the city. I had a clear goal, to find the information Murray had spoken about. There was just one problem. I had never used a computer before. I asked one of the internet cafe clients how to search for what I needed. At first I felt ashamed. I had never used a computer before, but my goal was too important to let embarrassment stop me. In just half an hour, he taught me the basics: what to write, where to search, and how to navigate the internet. It wasn't easy, and I struggled with frustration and headaches, but finally, I found what I was looking for. It took me nearly 3 months to truly understand the information. I pieced things together, learned what was important, and figured out how to begin my journey. But despite my growing fascination with treasure hunting, my priorities remained the same. My responsibilities at home came first. I couldn't abandon my father and mother, so I balanced my daily farm work with my search for knowledge. Even while tending to the land, I found my thoughts drifting to treasure hunting. It wasn't just about wealth. It was about securing a better future for my family. More than anything, I wanted to give my mother a life of peace and comfort. My greatest wish was that she would never have to struggle again. Since the day Murray introduced me to the world of treasure hunting, my perspective on everything changed. I no longer saw the land the way I once had. Every hill, every valley, every plateau I had passed 1,000 times before now seemed different, as if they held secrets waiting to be uncovered. One day I wandered farther than usual. Instead of resting in the shade of a tree as I normally would, I examined my surroundings carefully, scanning the earth as if seeing it for the first time. I had drifted away from the pasture without realizing it. Feeling exhausted, I sat down on a flat stone to rest. As I looked toward the distant hills, my fingers absent-mindedly traced the surface of the rock, running over its rough, weathered grooves. Then, as if something called me to it, I suddenly became aware of what I was touching. I stood up and inspected the stone more closely. Faint, eroded markings covered its surface, symbols worn away by time, wind, and rain. My heart pounded. Could this be something significant? I wiped at the rock, trying to clear the dust and debris, but the markings were too faded to make out. Yet deep inside I knew this was no ordinary stone. I got up, went back to where I had left my supplies, and grabbed the water I had brought for myself. Returning to the stone, I poured the water over its surface, washing away the dirt and dust. As the markings became clearer, I realized they were indeed inscriptions, ancient symbols etched into the rock. I tried my best to make sense of them, running my fingers over the worn carvings, but no matter how hard I thought, I couldn't decipher their meaning. A thought crossed my mind. What if the treasure I'm looking for is buried beneath this very stone? Not wanting to draw attention to what I had found, I quickly covered the rock with dirt again, hiding the newly cleaned surface. Then, gathering my supplies, I herded the goats and headed home. That night, I wrestled with a dilemma. Should I tell my father or keep it to myself? In the end, I chose silence. Strange dreams filled my sleep. In one, I unearthed a great treasure. In another, I dug endlessly and found nothing but dirt. The dreams left me restless, but they also strengthened my resolve. The next morning before dawn, I set out again, carrying my shovel, my pickaxe, and a heart pounding with excitement. When I reached the stone, I washed it clean once more, hoping fresh eyes might reveal something I had missed. But no matter how closely I examined it, the symbols remained a mystery. Determined, I lifted my pickaxe, ready to break or shift the stone. But then a thought stopped me. Why am I rushing this? Murray, he would know what to do. I retrieved his number and called him. As I described my discovery, I could practically hear the excitement in his voice. "Take a picture and send it to me," he said eagerly. I told Murray that my phone was old and didn't have a camera, so he had to come see the stone bed himself. The next day, Murray arrived and became our guest. I introduced him to my parents, but I didn't mention the real reason for his visit. I simply said he'd be staying with us for a few days. That night passed slowly, my mind restless with anticipation. Early the next morning, we gathered some food, my usual supplies, and set off toward the stone bed. As soon as Murray examined the inscriptions, his expression changed. "This is," he murmured. "Hetman, there's definitely something here." He traced his fingers over the markings, studying them carefully. Then he began explaining what each symbol meant. "This is a sign of—" "Don't explain it to me," I interrupted. "I'm not doing this for myself." Murray nodded. "All right, but you should still learn. You never know when this knowledge might come in handy." He carefully sketched the inscriptions into his notebook, recording every detail. Then, placing a small X on the stone bed, he looked at me seriously. "There's a grave here," he said, "and there's a way inside." I stared at him, unsure if he was joking. "I've never seen anything like this before," he continued, his voice laced with excitement. "The symbols indicate that this grave has a front entrance. We have to find it." "An entrance to a grave?" My mind raced. How could such a thing exist? Murray started looking around, his eyes scanning the surrounding rock formations. After a few minutes, he called me over and pointed at something I hadn't noticed before, faint carvings on other stones nearby. "Look at these," he said. "They were all placed here intentionally." One by one, he inspected each rock, running his hands over their surfaces. To make the markings clearer, we washed a few of them with water, revealing more hidden signs. Then Murray stepped back, walking about 100–150 meters away. He stood there for a moment, looking at the rock formations from a distance. Curious, I asked, "What are you trying to see from there?" Murray studied all the rock beds carefully, including the ones I had shown him. "They're all pointing to the same place," he muttered. I watched him intently, but while he examined the markings like a man deciphering an ancient code, I could only stare blankly. I had no experience. I couldn't see what he saw. Then suddenly, Murad's face lit up. "I got it!" he shouted. "I found it!" I jumped in fright and hissed, "Don't shout, you'll bring everyone here." Murray was too excited to care. His years of experience had led him to this moment. But there was a problem. Reaching the grave meant digging deep, deeper than we had imagined. "This won't be easy," he warned. "We have to be careful, not just to avoid being seen, but also because—" He hesitated before continuing. "If there are guardians protecting these treasures, they won't let us take them easily." I swallowed hard. Guardians? We had chosen our working hours wisely, during a time when everyone was inside, resting. The site was far from the village, isolated, which meant fewer risks. But Murray's words made me realize just how dangerous this could be. For the next few days, we didn't even touch the ground. We observed, planned, and considered every possibility. And then one morning, we finally began digging. The earth was tough, unyielding. Each strike of my shovel was a struggle, but I didn't care. The excitement drove me forward. We dug for 3 days. By the third evening, we hit something. A rock. But not just any rock. It had smooth, deliberate edges. Carefully, we cleared the dirt around it, revealing more of its shape. This was no natural formation. This stone had been crafted by human hands. Night was approaching, so we packed our tools and left. Back at home, Murray spoke to me seriously. "We don't know what we're dealing with," he said. "Things might happen, things you won't be able to explain." Then he handed me a small amulet and instructed me to wear it around my neck. "If this charm ever becomes heavy," he said, "or if you see smoke rising from it, leave. Immediately. Don't look back." His voice grew even more grave. "And if you ever see your parents standing there with you, run. That's not them." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I nodded and placed the amulet around my neck. That night, instead of my usual dreams of discovery and success, I was tormented by nightmares. Dark, terrifying visions haunted me, their meaning unclear, but their warning unmistakable. By morning, a part of me wanted to walk away from it all. Maybe some treasures aren't meant to be found. But then another thought crept in. We're so close. We've already done the hard part. In just a few more hours, I could go from being nobody to someone who had unearthed something incredible. How could I turn back now? Murray and I returned to our excavation site. With careful hands, we brushed the dirt from the stone that resembled a doorway. As we stepped back, I couldn't believe what we had uncovered. Behind the stone lay a space, more than just a chamber. It looked like an ancient house. "It's history," Murray whispered, his voice filled with awe. He pulled out a torch and lit it. The flickering flame cast eerie shadows on the stone walls, revealing intricate engravings. The place looked like an underground museum, untouched for centuries. My heart pounded with excitement as we walked forward. The narrow passage stretched for about 4 or 5 meters, leading us deeper into what felt like a hidden structure. Everything about it seemed carefully designed, as if it were once a place of importance. At the end of the path, we reached another stone door. Unlike the first, this one wouldn't budge. We pushed, pulled, and searched for any mechanism that might open it. After some time, Murray noticed another stone buried slightly beneath the ground. We dug around it and found that it was blocking the door. With effort, we removed it, and slowly the door creaked open. The moment the door parted, we saw them. Snakes. They coiled at the threshold, their heads raised, watching us. They didn't hiss or strike. They simply observed. "They're the Guardians," Murray muttered. Before I could respond, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small, worn book. He began chanting prayers in a low, steady voice. The snakes remained still for a moment. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, they slithered away toward the walls. One by one, they disappeared into a hole in the stone. Murray didn't stop chanting. His voice grew stronger, more insistent. Then, from the depths of the chamber, a sound rose. Screams. Agonized, wailing voices filled the air, making my blood run cold. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the presence of something unseen, something watching us. Murray pressed a firm hand to my chest, stopping me from stepping forward. "Stay back," he ordered. The screams grew louder, more desperate. But Murray's prayers didn't falter. He continued, unwavering, until at last the voices faded into silence. Only then did he lower his hand. We stepped inside. Beyond the threshold was a smaller room. It was filled with silver, jewels, swords gleaming under the dim light of our torch. The air smelled of age, of dust and forgotten history. But my eyes weren't on the treasure. At the far end of the room stood a tomb. Murray exhaled deeply, as if he had expected this all along. "This," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is the real treasure." Murray's voice was firm. "Don't touch it. Don't go near it." Even if there had been 10 times the treasure before us, he wouldn't have changed his mind. His experience told him what I only suspected. Some things are not meant to be disturbed. I nodded in agreement. We gathered the swords, silver, and jewels, leaving the tomb untouched. That night, we sent the last of our loot home. It was the final day of my struggle, the last time I would ever know poverty. It took a few days for Murray's contacts to turn the treasure into money. When they did, my life changed forever. Years have passed since those days. At first, I feared the worst. I had read enough to know that disturbing hidden treasures often brought curses. I expected the jinn to come for me, to reclaim what we had taken, or to take my life in return. But nothing happened. Instead, I built the life I had always dreamed of. I now live at a mansion in a big city, far from where it all began. My parents have their own home, one I bought for them. I hired a kind and devoted couple to care for them, ensuring they never have to struggle again. I visit them every few days, and when I see my mother at peace, no longer forced to milk sheep at dawn, when I see my father without the weight of endless worries, I feel as if I'm in heaven. Much of my life remains a secret, but in the city's upscale district, I own a jewelry store. Every now and then when I reflect on the past, it all feels like a dream, a distant memory wrapped in shadow and gold.